Welcome to the Eco Life podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, and today I'm with a guest who you may be familiar with. I'm with Shawn Thomas, who was a guest on the EV Life podcast. So when we launched this new podcast, we mentioned that we weren't going to stop talking about EVs, and I'm so excited to have Shawn with me here to talk about what he's doing with Plug and Drive at an event that we're right in front of here in Edmonton.
Thanks. I've been with Plug and Drive for a couple of years now. They're a nonprofit. They're just entering their 15th year. So this is their 15th year anniversary this year. And we're part of their EVs for Everyone Cross Canada tour. So there's 5 stops on the Western region, 5 stops on the Eastern region. And I've been working with Plug and Drive since last year. First event we did with them was at the Edmonton Motor Show. We did a auto experience where we had a little track set up and had people driving around cones through, and just gives a little bit of a chance for folks that have never experienced an electric vehicle to drive an electric vehicle and then talk to owners like myself about what it's like to drive an electric vehicle in Alberta.
So I want to talk more about the event that we're at, but before we get into that, I'm just curious how you got involved in the electric vehicle space, because I guess you are kind of an educator when it comes to EVs.
Yeah, I never thought I would be starting out. During COVID, my wife wrote off her BMW and we started looking at a second vehicle to supplement our house. We looked at electric vehicles, and her initial concern was, well, we wouldn't be able to do long road trips with an electric vehicle. We put a deposit down on a Hyundai Ioniq 5, and it's been a journey ever since. The first road trip we did in that vehicle was to Canmore to an EV show. So there was a whole bunch of Teslas lined up and our little Hyundai Ioniq 5. And because it was so new, everyone was coming over and talking to us and chatting with us and asking us very specific questions about how it drove and how it worked. And it just inspired me to learn more about electrification, and every engagement I have with the public, I learn new things. There's so many great questions that people have, but you also get used to very common questions. People have questions about range anxiety, about how it's like in the winter, and I enjoy talking to folks and educating them on how great driving an electric vehicle is.
Yeah. I'm sure people appreciate getting that information from a low pressure environment, and that is kind of what we're doing here with Plug and Drive at the Meet event. So can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of this event?
So Plug and Drive, their main purpose is EV education. So they work specifically with EV owners in order to provide that experience to customers. They also partner with the dealership. So the dealerships supply the vehicles, and then we just talk about our experiences, or if we have specific information about specific brands, they'll ask us specific questions. And it's really just answering the same 4 or 5 questions over and over again. What is it like to drive in the winter? How do I charge it? Do you still have range anxiety? And it's been a pleasure talking to folks and educating them, and I've had some really great engagements of folks that were somewhat negative, somewhat reserved. I don't know if an EV is going to work for myself or my family, or I'm too remote, I don't think it's going to work. And putting them in a vehicle and showing them in the navigation the range that the vehicles have and how far they can go, they're suddenly transformed and they're encouraged and interested in buying an electric vehicle.
Well, I'm glad that you have so much experience answering those same 4 questions, because I'm going to ask you, now that you've owned an electric vehicle for quite a few years now, what has it been like driving in the winter? Because I think that's one of the biggest questions I've heard from a lot of our members when we're at events and they come up to us and they ask us about EVs. The biggest concern seems to be around how they perform in winter conditions.
It's my favorite question to answer, because the answer is driving an electric vehicle in the winter is awesome. It's like turning on a hairdryer. It heats up instantly. There's far less moving parts, so there's less mechanical strain. You don't have that like groaning, angry sound when you turn on your vehicle in -30. It just turns on and drives perfectly fine. The biggest concession that everyone does know about is, yeah, you'll lose range in the winter. But it's not as severe as most people think, and the reason that vehicles lose range in the winter isn't for the reason that most people think. They lose range because the only source of energy to heat the cabin is that giant battery. Mm-hmm. So in order to get myself toasty warm at plus 20 from minus 30, that's a 50-degree swing, so it takes a lot of thermal energy to warm up the cabin. There's tricks that you can do to mitigate that, and the one that I like doing is when I'm charging at home, I'll turn the vehicle on and let it warm up while it's still plugged in the garage, and then when I go on my road trip, it takes less energy to keep it warm than it does to get it up to temperature.
That leads me into my next question around range anxiety. So that is a really popular question for Albertans who I've spoken to. It's around, am I going to make it to my destination before my car runs out of juice? And so what's your experience been like?
I think range anxiety definitely does exist, and it lasts for, I would say, about the first 3 to 6 months of ownership. You get used to knowing where the charging infrastructure is and where you can stop and charge. Similar to having a preferred gas station brand, I know where to charge if I'm going to BC or if I'm going to Calgary, if I'm going to the mountains on Highway 16. Where it is still a little bit lacking is northeastern Alberta, up Fort McMurray area, that sort of thing. And that would be a case where a plug-in hybrid or something of that nature would be a better option for someone that's regularly making trips up that direction. But I would encourage folks to do the research. There's an app called PlugShare, and you can see the little dots all over Alberta and all over North America where there is charging infrastructure, and you can see where there's charging infrastructure lacking. If that's places that you're regularly going, a plug-in hybrid would probably be a better choice.
So when you're speaking to people and they're unsure if an EV is right for them, what are some questions that you're asking to determine if a plug-in hybrid is a better fit, or maybe there are some fears that you can sort of alleviate just based on your experience and recommend an EV?
The biggest question I asked is, do they have the ability to plug in at home? If they can charge at home or at work, and for the most part they're driving in around the city, an EV makes perfect sense. But like I said, if they're going up somewhere like Fort McMurray or up northern Alberta, it might be a little more difficult to get there with fully electric. So a plug-in hybrid would be a better option. So it really depends. For the most part, a lot of the people that I've talked to are really just looking at a local commuter and still just concerned about, can they add that home charging into their panel? Do they have the ability to expand that charging infrastructure? And what is the grid going to do long term? There's been a lot of concerns around fears of the grid can't handle electrification.
You mentioned that the Plug and Drive event has been touring around Canada. How has the response been in Alberta compared to some other places across Canada?
I think Alberta is a little bit more oil and gas focused, so we do get a little bit more negativity. Sometimes it's someone bringing a partner out or a friend out to the event to say, hey, experience this, I'm already an EV owner, come drive it. And at the start of the event or the start of that drive, they're quite negative and saying that it's not going to work for them. And by the end, we've got them convinced, and I've had folks, especially in some of the bigger vehicles like the Silverado that's got almost 800 kilometers of range, it opens their eyes to the possibilities for them and for their situation to be able to go fully electric.
And, we kind of talk about like the Silverado. There are so many options now for electric vehicles. You can get a pickup truck, you can get like SUVs, obviously smaller cars, and we're seeing more EVs coming to Canada and more people adopting EVs. How do you feel the infrastructure overall is keeping up with the increase in usage of EVs?
I think we've still got a little bit more work to do on improving the infrastructure, but if you're talking just power capacity, there's still tricks that EPCOR and companies can use to provide an offset. So there's this idea of when everyone gets home at 5 p.m., they all turn on their appliances, and that's what the grid is sized for, is that peak demand right at 5, 6 p.m. So what we can do is, for EV owners, we're intrinsically cheapskates. So if they offered us incentives to charge overnight by just even a couple of cents off per kilowatt hour, we would absolutely use those time of use rate changes and charge our vehicles off peak. Like right now, Alberta doesn't have any off-peak pricing. It's just the same fixed rate. So that's one thing that will absolutely make a big difference in supporting the grid and the grid health, having people charge when there's no demand, but they have excess production.
And I understand some cars are actually set up where you can sort of schedule when it charges. So you can plug it in, but it wouldn't start charging until you kind of indicate that you want it to charge at, let's say, 1 in the morning.
Exactly, yeah. Both the vehicle and the device that you're plugging into the vehicle both support, if you're using a smart EV SE is what it's called, it supports the ability of doing time of use charging. That's what I use at my house. Because we've got so much sunshine, I actually set mine to charge off of excess solar power.
Nice. Well, I think it's always really valuable to get a first-hand experience of what it's like to actually drive an EV, and you are knowledgeable. You've been driving an EV for years, and so are the other ambassadors working with Plug and Drive. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of that knowledge with us. And is there anything else you'd like to share about Plug and Drive and about MEET before we sign off today?
Yeah. This is actually the 15th year of Plug and Drive. They started back when EVs were very, very new. And their whole goal is to educate folks on what electric vehicles are. And I'm a strong believer that getting someone behind the seat, behind the wheel of an EV and have them actually drive it and talk to someone that can tell them what it's like to drive in Alberta is a much more beneficial experience than, for example, a rental agency just thrusting an EV upon someone when they're not expecting it. Because there is some changes that you need to think about. There's apps that you need to have to be able to charge public charging, and even just knowing where to charge. Places like AMA here has 2 chargers here that they provide for their members. But a lot of the folks that I've talked to, because they don't have an electric vehicle, they don't know about that public charging infrastructure. And it's not as obvious as a gas station because it's not branded and you don't see the signage on the street. So I think having the ability to support and sponsor an event like Plug and Drive and have the dealerships present vehicles, it's great advertising for the dealerships, but it's also great to just get that conversation started with folks that are EV curious. These events in particular, I think, are way more positive engagements than something like having a trailer or having a tent just set up to some other vehicle roadshow type event. Especially in Alberta, folks are a little bit more oil and gas minded. We did a roadshow event with Plug and Drive at a NASCAR track. And some of the responses were more what I am used to 3 or 4 years ago, where, those EV things will never work in Alberta. These days, I've noticed, especially at the MEET event, it's far more positive. And perhaps that's the political climate we're in right now, or is the price of gas. But people are far more receptive to electric vehicles these days than they were when I started doing this in 2012, or 2022, sorry.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on to the Eco Life podcast and chatting with us. Can you just share with our audience where they can find more information about Plug and Drive and future events that are hosted?
Yeah, so Plug and Drive has a website, pluganddrive.ca. I believe after the end of August 30th, we'll be packing up the trailer and all of the vehicles, and then we're going to be going to Vernon, BC next. We're actually towing the trailer with one of the electric vehicles all the way out to Vernon. But absolutely look at the website, and it'll have the list of vehicles that we have offering at each event as the events come up.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Eco Life podcast. I was so happy to chat with Shawn Thomas today, and I can't wait for you to hear our next interview. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, and we'll talk to you then.